I'm working on that response, but it's getting very, very long, and I realize it is too long. It has too many different topics in it, and it's not going to really keep this conversation going. So I am still working on it. I am not ignoring any of your points. We can come back to any of those. I've already recorded a lot of responses. I can edit those, finish editing those up, and get those to you if you want to hear them. But for now, I think I want to make a short one, and so I'm just going to address one single part of this conversation, which is how you're describing the density gradient in two different ways back to back. And let's see if we can get to a better understanding to where I can understand what's going on in your mind about when do we use the density gradient and when do we not use the density gradient. So let's hear what you have to say, and then I'll pause and interject from time to time.
Let's say we had a medium that had the same density, if that, I'm not sure if that's possible, but let's just say we did. I still think less dense would rise and more dense would go down, because relative density is the difference between the object and the object's density and the medium's density. To me, that's how we've got the gradient to begin with. So basically, in nature, the reason that more density is down and less density is up is because you've got a medium, and you know, less dense is up and more dense is down. So that's kind of where the gradient come from to begin with. So if you imagine just everything, just imagine one medium, and then you had all objects of different densities, or all gases in this medium of different densities, and then just imagine it sorted itself out so that more dense was down and less dense is up, because more dense in the medium down, less dense in the medium up. You'd end up with a gradient eventually anyway, and that's where I think our gradient came from.
So we just heard you say that with no density gradient at all, dense things go down and less dense things go up. So we do not need the density gradient to give us the direction. The direction is down naturally. That is what we just heard you say. It was very clear. You also said that when those things moved down, that created the density gradient. So that much was very clear, and I can run with that. I can understand that dense things go down, light things go up, that creates a density gradient, and now we have a density gradient. Great.
You know, less dense down, more dense up than the medium. That's why we've got a gradient today, where we live. So yeah, less dense will always go up, more dense will always go down.
Excellent. That works for me. But wait, we're going to hear you say something different.
If there's a gradient, then yes. If there's a gradient, dense objects will move towards where the medium is denser, less dense objects will move towards where the medium is less dense.
What I just heard was, if there's no gradient, the dense things go down. If there is a gradient, the things follow where the gradient is. Okay, how much gradient is the minimum amount needed before we say there's no gradient?
If you change the layout so that you have a gradient going in a different layout, then again, more dense will go towards more dense, less dense will go towards less dense, just as we've seen with the helium balloon in the car and on the vomit comet.
Now, that just sounded like you were saying that the density gradient causes the object to move in a particular way, or it influences the direction the object will move. And this is counterintuitive to what you had said earlier, where you said that dense things want to go down, and that created the density gradient, right? The density gradient did not force the dense things to go down. It was the result of dense things going down. I would like to suggest that you embrace the first one, that you say, what if we were to say that the movement of dense things downward, dense things go down, and the movement downward causes the gradient. And when we have some acceleration, that creates a sideways gradient. That same acceleration will influence the way objects move, just like it influences the air. And so what we're seeing is not that the density gradient forces objects to move in a particular way. It is that the density gradient matches the way the objects move, right? What am I saying? I'm saying that if an object goes down naturally, which we've agreed that it does, that creates a gradient top to bottom. If objects under the influence of acceleration are wanting to go at some other angle because of the influence of the acceleration, then that will create a density gradient along that same angle. And we'll see that with our helium balloons and our plumb bobs. They will align with that same angle. What if we said that? So I think that would bring us into agreement, and that would give us a system, a very simple explanation that goes and explains all of these observations. All we have to say is that dense things naturally go down, and if you accelerate, dense things go against the acceleration. And that those two effects can be added together to give you any number of different angles. So how about that? Can we work with that?
If there's a density gradient, then the less dense will move towards the less dense of that gradient. If there's a density gradient again, more dense will move towards the more dense of that gradient.
I think we can agree to that with just maybe a slight tweak to your terminology. Let's say that very slightly differently. Let's say if there is a density gradient, then we are likely to see the less dense objects move to where the less dense medium is, because the medium and the objects are being influenced by the same influences, whether that be the downward stacking that we normally get just at rest, or the influence of accelerations. Let's do that. Instead of saying that the gradient is pushing the objects around, we can say that the gradient is the result of the same thing that results in the object settling the way it does. In other words, back to what you started with, which is that objects will sort themselves in order of density, and that will create the gradient. Gradient does not push the objects to sort themselves. It is the result of the objects sorting themselves. How about that?
But for me, my hypothesis would be, to put it basically, more dense than the medium down, less dense than the medium up. However, if we have a gradient in the medium, less dense than the medium will move towards the less dense, and more dense will move towards the more dense.
Once more, I'd like you to make a slight amendment to that to just make it clear that the gradient is the result of objects sorting themselves from densest to least dense, and does not actually force the objects to sort themselves along that axis. And when we have a density gradient, we would expect to find objects move along that gradient because the movement of objects in that direction is what created the gradient. If we could just change it to that, then I think we could have total agreement. Great. Hopefully this is fairly short. And let me know if you want to talk about any of the other points right away, and I'll rush short ones out for those. Meanwhile, I'll keep working on the long answer with all the stuff. Okay.